Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this very important program where we're discussing the life, legacy, and the efforts of our dear brother Mansour Ansari. And we have two very special guests with us, Imam Khalid Griggs, who is a longtime friend of Brother Mansour. The two of them um, have spent many years together doing Islamic work. And then, of course, we have Ustada Zainab Ansari, who is a renowned scholar in her own right. But in addition, what makes her very special today in regards to this program is that she is also the daughter of Brother Mansour. So with that, I will be handing it over to Imam Khalid and Ustada Zainab. Imam Khalid will get things started for us, and then we will see a very good discussion. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. First, I'd like to greet Sister Ustada Zainab. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. How are you doing?
Alhamdulillah, I'm doing fine. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Alhamdulillah, alhamdulillah. We are here to talk about a very important subject. And that subject is our understanding and knowing about the legacy of a very dear brother who has been about this work for close to at least 40 years, if not more. Our brother Mansour Ansari. Brother Mansour was diagnosed with a brain condition on May the 22nd of this year. And for anyone who knows Brother Mansour, he has a very lively, enlightening personality. He lights up a room no matter where he is. But this particular condition is a very debilitating condition. It's a fast-moving condition. And so we have a twofold purpose here this afternoon. One, to just tell you about, alhamdulillah, the great work that our brother Mansour has done for so many years, but also to let you know that he is in need of assistance from us at this particular point, because the kind of specialized care that he needs because of this condition has an enormous price tag to it. And so we will flash information about the Launch Good campaign. There may be other ways, and Sister Zainab will be able to tell you how you can contribute to this great cause. Sister Zainab, I'm going to get right to you, but if you just allow me to do an opening volley about how I know your father. I know your father. I met your father in Washington, D.C. in the 1970s. And to be quite honest, we met him there because he was coming through to kidnap your mom and take her from Washington, D.C., to take her away from us with the Islamic Party in North America. And of course, I'm joking about that. But I met him in Washington, D.C., and have spent a number of years with him. But before I just intersperse some things about your father, I'd like to just open up to you and just tell us anything you want to tell us about your father. We'll talk about the campaign a little bit later, inshallah.
Thank you so much. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi taslima. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala barakatuh. First of all, I just want to say that I really appreciate this. I am just so touched by this, Imam Khalid. I know that you and my dad go back, mashallah, decades. I remember working on a paper about the Islamic Party in North America some years back and doing oral history interviews, and your name came up, mashallah, so many times. So this really means a lot to me. I want to thank Brother Mus'ab for getting us started. I want to thank ICNA for allowing us this forum to raise these funds to help my dad navigate this very difficult diagnosis. But just a few things, because I'm speaking as a daughter more than I'm speaking as a teacher or a da'iyah or a scholar, and I really want our esteemed audience to know that the work that I have been engaged in the last 20 years as a da'iyah, as a teacher, working with young Muslims, up-and-coming leaders, that work would not have been possible without the dua, the hopes, dreams, aspirations, the sacrifices made by my parents. And my dad in particular always had this dream and this vision that me and my sister that we would go and study, because both of us were actually studying overseas together, mashallah, my sister Samaya and myself. And it was something that for my dad, it was like the sky is the limit, and then beyond. He's just always been my number one person, supporting me, encouraging me, challenging me to really be my best self. And it's, as the daughter of someone like Brother Mansour, I always kind of say to myself, what can I do to maybe in a small way try to repay some of that amazing love and kindness and support and sacrifice. And that's really why we're here today.
Yep, very good. When I first met your father, and I think that conviction for you and your sister to really learn Islam and practice Islam came from a very early experience with him. He shared with me when I met him in Washington, D.C., that his parents objected to his becoming Muslim so much that his dad said that, it's almost like, you're no longer my son. I don't know who you've become. I've groomed you a certain way, and now look at what you're doing now. But he did not allow the pressure coming from his family to have him to even weaken his commitment to Islam. And Brother Mansour, and we'll talk more about this as we go on, but he's just an extraordinary individual. And even though I met him as a part of the Islamic Party in North America, of course, he went to New Orleans, and then he went to Atlanta. And everywhere he went, he had a rug shop, and he was selling books. And I was a big customer, not with the rugs, I couldn't afford it, but a big customer when he had his bookstore, like the first bookstore, Islamic bookstore in Atlanta. So can you tell us a little bit about your father and his path in Islam?
Absolutely. So, whenever I think about my parents' journey to Islam, I think about, the ayah in Al-Baqarah, "Udkhulu fi silmi kafa," enter into peace, enter into Islam wholeheartedly. So my father's embrace of Islam, it's almost like I like to compare it to a Sayyidina Umar moment, in the sense that there's this very kind of amazing sort of on the spot transformation. Now, by the way, this is not a story that I think my dad has shared with a lot of people, but I really want to emphasize this, because for some people, their path to Islam is very intellectual. They read, they study, they go and speak to scholars, et cetera, et cetera. They're kind of on this path of kind of inquiry. For my dad, initially, when my mom became Muslim and invited him to Islam, his response was, I don't really have to become Muslim. I don't really need to do this. I will worship God through my music. Because at that time he was kind of involved in the jazz scene. I think first in New York and then in New Orleans. So he was very much about not really kind of wanting organized religion, and he would just kind of worship God his own way. So, and of course, my mom had become Muslim, and she had this very structured, organized approach, what have you. So there was a period of time in their relationship, in their marriage, where they had separated. And my mom was encouraging my dad to think about Islam, and he really was just not wanting to be part of that conversation. And there was this very dramatic moment where he went to go and see her, to tell her, that's it, no more communication, no more letters, please, none of this. I don't want to be a Muslim. I don't want this.
No.
And my mom recounts this as this very sort of dramatic transformation that takes place, that in one breath he's saying, no, I don't want this. Then in the next he's saying, wait a minute, what am I saying? Of course I want to be Muslim. Of course I want Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's like something happening, a transformation of the heart happening on the spot. So that's why I think about Sayyidina Umar, because he has this transformation that he experiences, upon interacting with his family members, and then wanting to look at that Quran they were reciting from Surah Taha. So my dad, this is what happens. That Allah Ta'ala on the spot is going to cause his transformation. And that's something that completely just kind of ushers in a new life and a new existence for my parents. And of course, certainly for me and my sister when we were born a few years later. And yes, absolutely. My dad, coming from an Arab Christian background, the idea of his becoming Muslim, the idea of his marrying, the idea that he'd marry my mother, who's African American, was anathema. It was anathema for them. I mean, it was not something they could even conceive of. So, like many of that early generation of Muslims, where they encountered so many challenges being Muslim, being cut off by family and all these things. I mean, that was really my dad's experience. That his parents just could not kind of come around to embracing his conversion. But I will say this: he never cut off ties. He always spoke very respectfully and lovingly about them. He always maintained good relations with his siblings and aunts and uncles and cousins. And that was modeled for me and my sister throughout the years, that when you become Muslim, it's not about cutting off your family or being harsh, but it's about being compassionate. It's about being patient. It's about taking the higher path. And my dad's always embodied that.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. You've been very fortunate, you and your sister, to have the parents that you have. Because your mother, this is about your father, but your mother, Sister Kafi, was really a very committed Muslim. And she was very straightforward with her Islam. And so they blazed the path that you were very easily could see and could follow. And they were living Islam as opposed to just trying to teach it. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless them for the example that they set and the position that they put you and your sister in. When we talk about Brother Mansour, as I said, I met him in the Islamic Party, but Brother Mansour understood very clearly that just an individual Muslim can only impact and affect society up to a certain point, that no matter how much piety we have or anything else, that we must in some way be a part of a collective effort to practice this deen. And so your father, from the time I first met him up until this very second, was always a part of some organized effort. He was a part of some ideological thrust. I'll never forget, and I don't want to talk too much, but I just want to share one story. In the 1990s, I've forgotten what particular year, I was on my way, I think I was going to Palestine, and I had communicated with your dad, and he told me, when you get a long layover so I can hang out with him, and this is what I did. And he took me, he was at that time with I think it was the Muslim Institute. And he showed me all around, introduced me to a lot of people, and that kind of global Muslim was evident from the first time I saw him outside of the United States. He just had a very global perspective and was not into any kind of little narrow parochial practice of Islam.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate your sharing that story, Imam Khalid, because, subhanAllah, I think that growing up in the midst of a very activist household, it's something that I think perhaps when we were smaller, my sister and I, that we may have taken for granted. But actually looking back and kind of seeing the amazing journey that my parents took, and my dad, absolutely, for him, it was always about words had to translate into action.
Yes.
And, there was his understanding of being Muslim it wasn't about, I'm just going to go and sort of go to school or get a job and kind of just go somewhere and be comfortable. But no, it was always constant striving in the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the way that kind of translated for my dad is he very much wanted to be part of some type of movement or da'wah effort or or project with the very sort of kind of express aim of bettering the condition of Muslims, of making sure that that the experiences of oppressed and downtrodden Muslims, that these experiences were being centered and uplifting. And he was always very politically aware and politically active. So I remember, like, for us as kids, like when we would kind of maybe step into a masjid that was like no politics or whatever. Like, it was so strange for us because for my mom and dad, they didn't separate between the religious and spiritual and political. For them, all of those strands were very much interwoven because that's the part of the tapestry of being a Muslim.
Yeah.
So absolutely, my dad was part of the Islamic Party. Then there's Jamaat al-Muslimin, where he met Imam Zaid Shakir, I believe. And then some years later, it was, Dr. Kaleem Siddiqui, and that was like back in the day in London, and the Muslim Institute and the Muslim Parliament Project of Great Britain. And that was, and that my dad was always happiest when he was involved in those projects, for sure.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons that I love your father so much. In a way, I think we're kind of kindred spirits, and we could not see each other for a year, 2 years, 3 years, but when we would see one another, it's as if Allah had conjoined our hearts. And so it was always a pleasure. I want to bring up another dimension to your dad that I'm sure you and family members know, but he had one of the best senses of humor of any Muslim brother, and it was always within bounds. It was nothing excessive, extreme, insulting to anybody, but he could find, he is so clever, he could find a way to brighten up the most distraught individual. And if you weren't distraught, you would just crack up with some of the things that he would say, but they were always, in my estimation, Islamically appropriate. It weren't vulgar jokes. He wasn't a jokey joke kind of guy, but he has a wonderful sense of humor, and I really appreciate that.
Alhamdulillah, absolutely. And see, that's the thing that I learned, coming up, Imam Khalid, that, because I remember spending time in countries in the Middle East where some people had this idea that to be religious meant you couldn't smile and you couldn't be cheerful. You had to be very kind of serious and dour. And that was never my dad's approach. It's really wonderful seeing the interaction between him and my mom, because she's from Detroit, he's from Worcester, Massachusetts. She's a very dry sense of humor, very proper, mashallah. Rarely laughed at his jokes, although one time I think he got a laugh out of her, subhanAllah. But no, he's got this really, I love the Worcester accent. So you take the Worcester accent with all the jokes, and it's just a wonderful combination, mashallah. He excels at Husni Mubarak jokes, I have to say. I'm not sure if this audience really connects to that, but it's the Husni Mubarak jokes that honestly have me laughing the most.
Right. Yeah, he has an excellent sense of humor. And if you could speak a little bit about his business acumen, because he has always been an interesting combination for me for an Islamic movement worker, in that he is so good, I will just say that, with business. And so could you tell us a little bit about some of his business pursuits?
So my dad has always, he's always kind of viewed having his own business as an opportunity to really kind of support his family in a way that is, dignified, where he's not necessarily dependent, on others. And that's really kind of interesting because at the time that my dad, when he became Muslim, I think his closest friends and mentors were African Americans. And that's something that's very important in the African American Muslim community, this idea of kind of, of doing for self, that if people will not give you certain opportunities, then you're going to be kind of enterprising and try to create a livelihood for yourself and your family. So my dad, it's so interesting because my dad's, even though he trained in English and journalism, ultimately he went into business. And the way that came about was he found himself in New Orleans, and there were a few different things that he was trying, including actually driving a taxi for a while. So he's had just such an amazing life experience. But he met his brother, Safi Kaskas, a Lebanese brother who had a rug shop. And he became one of my dad's first mentors in Islam, as well as in the Oriental rug business. So I grew up actually in my dad's Oriental rug shop, and he loved. And the thing is, let me emphasize this: it wasn't just, okay, I'm going to sell rugs because it's a good way of making money. No, it was like, this is an amazing Islamic art form. If you think about it, Islamic art combines this beautiful aesthetic with with kind of a medium that's also so practical, right? Because rugs, the rugs are there on the floor to act as cushion, and you can pray on the rug. And
Yeah.
for even some cultures are sleeping on these rugs, and the rugs are also museum worthy in so many cases. So my dad became an expert in Oriental rugs. Brother Safi taught him how to, not just this is how you sell the rug, but this is how you repair the rug. This is how you preserve the rug. This is like the provenance of these rugs. So that was something I kind of grew up with. My earliest memories are where he had a rug shop, and then my mom, because this is before my sister was born, so my mother and I, we were in the little apartment upstairs, and I would come downstairs and I would try to talk about the rugs to the customers. And I was probably only, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 years old or something like that. And those were like some of my, honestly, my parents' fondest memories. So, and I really appreciated that because it was something that I kind of grew up with, that was kind of surrounded by rugs in Islamic art. And for my dad, this was important because he wanted my sister and me to have this appreciation of what are the values of kind of larger Islamic civilization, and how you can actually learn those values from these beautiful, these beautiful sort of tapestries and sort of textiles that have been produced in the Muslim world.
Yeah. I got an education about Oriental rugs every time I stepped into one of his shops. He was very willing and able to educate the uneducated about Oriental rugs, and it's a fascinating field. And he had a passion for this. I had met Brother Safi Kaskas a number of years ago too. As a matter of fact, he at one point wanted to try to recruit me to come to New Orleans to try to help do some work in the African American Muslim community. But I said, well, I got my hands full up here. But Brother Mansour, in addition to his travels, can you tell us something about maybe some interesting story, just something, because he is a citizen of the world. He's a global citizen, and I would try to keep up at times with, where's Brother Mansour now? And so could you tell us a little bit about his global citizenship?
There are so many amazing stories to share, but let me there's one in particular, inshallah, that I'd like to speak to, and that's a wonderful question. Thank you, Imam Khalid. Another thing too about my mom and dad, I've met folks that are very kind of content just to kind of be in the same place and never leave that place, and they think everything they need is right there. And what I really appreciate about my parents is that from a very early age, I mean, my sister and I were quite young. We were traveling, going to the Middle East, traveling during a time when, people would have said, okay, maybe it's not quite, the sort of conventional thing to kind of do this. And for my mom and dad, they felt very strongly that they wanted their daughters to have the experience of being in Muslim majority societies, given that we're coming up in America as minorities. Because, that idea of kind of like double consciousness that W.E.B. Du Bois writes about, you feel kind of sometimes torn between worlds. So they want us to experience, what is it like being in a place where you don't really kind of have to justify your existence, right? So we ended up going to different parts of the Muslim world. And in terms of an experience that, again, there's so many stories, but in terms of something that really kind of stands out, let me say this. And, this is, I want my audience, kind of invite you, and I want to kind of bring you into this space for a moment, but to be American Muslims and to have enough trust in the idea of the ummah of the Prophet ﷺ, to think that we're not going to see sectarian labels. We're not going to make divisions between Sunni and Shia. I know nowadays it's hard for people to even think about, especially with the tragedy in Syria. But this was, again, years before that. And for my parents, they could go and pick up and move to a place like Iran, and we're Sunni American Muslims, and they're not fazed at all by any of that. For them, these are our Muslim brothers and sisters. So I want to share that, as kind of a broader piece of this, because that's the household I came up in. It was like Muslim unity was not a slogan. It was very real for my parents. And I remember just one experience in particular. This was in Iran. We were in southern Iran in the city called, a place called Shiraz, a very beautiful city. And my parents, so my dad had been friends with an Afghan family here in Atlanta, but
Mm-hmm.
when we went to Iran, my dad actually, we traveled to southern Iran, went to the city, Shiraz, and he actually made an effort to find the relatives of this Afghan family. Okay, again, of all the things my dad could have done with his time and been a
Sure.
tourist and all this type of thing, you know, hanging out with kind of VIPs, which he knew, alhamdulillah, and they loved him. But I remember we were walking down these alleyways in this very humble neighborhood, meeting with this family of Afghan refugees. Like he made a point to do that so that he could bring them things from their family. And I remember they were very poor people, but they went and brought out the tea and the bread and the cheese and whatever they could find to give us. They brought it to, and they were, you know, and it makes like I want to cry when I think about it, because just imagine that juxtaposition. You know, you're American Muslims, you come from that background of being in the United States with everything that we enjoy in this country, and now we're sitting in this very humble home drinking tea with this Afghan refugee family. It's just amazing how that really instilled in me just an understanding of my parents' values, mashallah.
Yeah, yeah. That's really amazing, and just the expansiveness that comes from travel and not going as the ugly American, but going and just actually trying to connect to the society. Your dad was really great at that. Um, you know, when I think about your father and your mom, um, I think about how important it is for parents to not just talk to their children about Islam. You touched on this a little earlier, but I want you to just expand a little bit more on that, because in today's society, and even when I embraced Islam years ago, there was too much of do what I say and not what you see me doing, and children listening to their parents and trying to be respectful, but just seeing some kind of different presentation from them. Tell me a little bit about your dad and that kind of example that he set for you and your family.
You know, that's a wonderful question. I think about, you know, subhanAllah, the ayah in the Quran, you know, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون. So this is the ayah in 1690, Surah An-Nahl, chapter 16, verse 90, that verily God enjoins justice and kindness, ihsan, compassion, and ita'i dhil qurba, and giving to those, doing good for those that are near to you, to your kin. And Allah Ta'ala forbids all that is shameful and wrong and oppressive, and He encourages you and exhorts you that you might be mindful. So, and the reason why this ayah comes to mind is that, you know, with my parents being converts to Islam, they converted, and they're part of a generation of Muslims that really took their Islam seriously. It's not okay. We're gonna be Muslim, but kind of go back to the things that we were doing. I mean, not at all. It was like, you know, sort of wholesale transformation.
Mhm.
Um, and there was no kind of like being on the fence about anything. I mean, fully committed, mashallah. So, and I really appreciated that, because as kids, you want to see that role model in front of you. And this is what I can say. Like, I know that I can stand in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, look, my parents really tried their utmost. They didn't order one thing and then do another. I mean, I always saw parents that were praying and fasting and giving in charity and dedicated to various causes in the community. Um, you know, and that's who my parents are, and I'm deeply indebted to them. And I would say for all of us, you know, we really have to make sure that as much as we can to try to close that gap between speech and action and bring those things together. And that generation of converts to which you belong, Imam Khalid, I think really excelled at that, mashallah.
Alhamdulillah, jazakallah. That's very good. You know, another thing too that is so impressive about your father to me is that oftentimes when Americans go abroad, whether they study, they're doing business, or like your parents, they're there in the area with you and your sister, and they're still very active and connected to the society. Oftentimes, Americans have the tendency to kind of forget about the home team, forget about what's going on at home, and just embrace what the struggles are somewhere else. But this was not your father. Whenever your father was in the country, I would all the time bump into him in all the right places, whether it's a rally for Imam Jamil Al-Amin, no matter what it is for indigenous people, I would bump into your father somewhere. And, and that was so um, satisfying to me to see that he never lost his commitment to making this society better. And while he was somewhere else, he took on that role. Let's try to see what I can do to help here. But he always was anchored in the social issues and social injustice in this country.
Absolutely. Because, for my dad, it wasn't about, being comfortable, kind of like being detached from those issues. So the idea was that, if we're going to go overseas and study, I mean, we have to come back and be able to translate this knowledge into something practical. Because, it is very tempting to say, okay, I've got, I have a certain amount of whatever that I've learned. I just want to focus on my own kind of self rectification, not really worry about these issues. But no, from the time I can remember these conversations that my parents would have until now, my dad has always been very consistent in that he truly feels that it is the social justice aspect of Islam that we cannot neglect, because if we neglect that, ultimately we're neglecting the prophetic model, alayhi salatu wasalam. So for my dad, it was very much about action. It wasn't just about, rhetoric. No, he was the one that was there at the protests, at the marches, raising awareness for issues that maybe some of us were shy to even discuss. Imam Jamil's case was always difficult, wasn't always the most popular thing to discuss, especially sort of, post 9/11. And my dad never shied away from that, whether it was addressing, the occupation, the Israeli occupation in Palestine, whether it was looking at what's happening here in the United States with African Americans and the carceral state. I mean, all of these issues were issues that my dad really paid a lot of attention to and never ever shied away from addressing. He always felt this was part of his responsibility as a Muslim.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. I was very heartbroken when I heard of your dad's condition. Another mutual friend of ours, Bilal Mahmoud, told me about the medical condition that your father had. Could you talk a little bit about that condition? Because just the idea, as the last time I saw him was actually in Atlanta in front of this, I think it was a courthouse there in Atlanta at an Imam Jamil rally, one of the many that we shared together. Can you talk a little bit to us about his what is the medical issue that he's being challenged with at this point?
So the diagnosis is one that really came as a shock to all of us, because my dad, mashallah, has always been so healthy and vibrant. And what happened was that was in April, my dad had an episode that my mom thought maybe was a stroke. And then after he was taken to the hospital and the doctors did scans, it was revealed that there was a mass on his brain. And we were just shocked because it's not something that we're aware of, in the family. And, he was just very, very, very healthy, mashallah, never had any complaints. So we got the official diagnosis, as you noted, in May. And, it really has, it's changed everything for us. I mean, my mom is now a full-time caregiver to my dad. My dad, I'm actually at my parents' home. My dad is upstairs. He's not even able to come downstairs now because he's bedridden. It's in the span of May to September, so 4 months, it's caused a lot of deterioration. So what it is, it's called glioblastoma. And of the types of brain cancer out there, sadly, this is the most aggressive type of brain cancer. And the prognosis is one that is, compared to other kinds of cancer, it's a very, let me just say, it's a very serious diagnosis with also a very sobering prognosis. And the main idea behind the launch good is just to make sure that we're able to provide the level of care that my dad needs. I mean, there's only so much nursing care currently covered by insurance, and there's also, if you go to the link, I have a link here in the chat. This might be a little shortcut: launchgood.com/help brother Mansour, Mansour. Again, launchgood.com/help brother Mansour. So the reality, my dear sisters, my dear brothers, my esteemed audience, is that in just a span of a few months, he's gone from being fully capable to being bedridden. Imagine that. And that means requiring assistance with the basic, things that we need, whether it's bathing and toileting and everything. So, and my mom is his primary caregiver. So that really is what we're trying to do. We're trying to raise those funds so that he can have proper nursing care, some respite for my mom, and and inshallah, whatever other course of treatment that my mother might deem it appropriate to pursue. It's a challenging time for our family, very challenging time. We never saw this coming. One of the things I will say is that, because my dad has always been a very giving and generous person, very involved in Islamic causes and activism, he was never someone to say, go and make a lot of money and sit on it, right? So that's why we are where we are today. We want to make sure that we can give back to my dad and help support him and my mom during this very difficult time.
Yeah, actually, Ustad Zainab, I was a little surprised when I saw the amount that you all were attempting to raise. I thought it would be considerably more than that, because the medical costs now, even when you have insurance, is tremendous, and only in the United States can you get these kind of out of control, disproportionate kind of rates for medical care in this country. So the question is then, is it possible that the amount that you're attempting to raise at this point, and you're not too far off from that, the last time I checked, is it possible to raise that amount? Because it's going to be needed. It's not like trying to buy, Cadillac or Mercedes or something like that. The medical cost is just outrageous.
Yes, inshallah, we are very grateful for our donors and whatever level of support. But I agree, Imam Khalid. I mean, already when you look at the hospital bills, you're like, the numbers are kind of staggering. So, there was also, I have to say, some initial shyness in even asking, but I realized that this is the best way that I know of to support my parents. I know the Muslim community is exceedingly generous, and our beloved Prophet said, alayhi salatu that sadaqah never decreases wealth. So our initial goal was 100K. Alhamdulillah, we met that. We're now at 108. So we've set a goal of 125. And inshallah, I'm happy to try to adjust that upward if you think that inshallah we can do that. And I encourage everybody here to please spread the word. Go to launchgood.com/help brother Mansour, Mansour, because those donations really, they mean a lot to us and to the level of care that my dad can receive. And those funds are going to go directly to my mother, who's managing that. And anyone who knows my mom knows how incredibly sharp she is, how, mashallah, how wise she is. And she will make sure to take care of that amana, that trust, in the best way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. But I do encourage you and your family to consider raising that amount, because, again, medical costs these days are just so enormous that the amount of money that you're raising now could be gone very quickly. And I think it's a matter, I know that it's a matter of just the Muslim community knowing that your father is in the medical and even the financial situation that he's in, that will require getting a Launch Good campaign to go. As you mentioned, Brother Mansour was not selling cotton rugs, or you're not selling something you can get in Walgreens or something. These were extremely expensive and beautiful rugs. But as you emphasize, he is an Islamic movement man. And so it was not just to enrich himself and give the family everything they could even dream about. He spent that money taking care of his family, but also investing that in Islamic work, in the Islamic movement. So I'm making an appeal to all of you all who are hearing and watching this particular broadcast to spread the word. First, do what you can to help yourself, but spread the word, because so many people in this country that Brother Mansour has touched over the years are not aware of his situation. I know when I've talked to others across the country, after I found out, and I've just kind of very recently found out. I didn't find out back in May. I very recently found out what was going on. Everyone I talked to is surprised. They didn't know that. So I think it's a matter of doing what we're doing now, trying to get the word out, but also making sure that your target is not, too low, and try to give the Muslim community in this nation an opportunity to help a brother who has done so much to help the Muslim community over the years, over the decades here in the United States. Sister Ustada Zainab, are there any other things you'd like to share about either your father's health? I know this is a difficult subject, but anything else that we can do in addition to making donations? What would you like to see done by the Muslim community?
Jazakallah khair. I really appreciate it. I think that, what I would, just reflecting on this experience and how it kind of came out of nowhere, I think I've got several kind of levels of advice, if you will. So on a, on a personal note, I will say to everybody listening here that it's really important that we not take our elders for granted. One of the things that the brain tumor is, because the brain tumor is actually located in the center for speech and memory and cognition. And, we're realizing through this diagnosis how much the brain controls that, we often don't even think about. So, my dad, who is very gregarious and cracking jokes and mashallah, just kind of like the life of the party. Now he's struggling with speech, and that's, to see that is very difficult. So speech and memory and these things have been impacted. And one of the things I'm very grateful that we did was we captured about 4 to 5 hours at one of my Taysir seminary students. Captured about 4 to 5 hours of oral history interviews with my dad. And so we've got this footage, and if anybody has any interest, maybe like turning it into like a mini documentary about kind of Islam in America through Brother Mansour's experience, I'd love to work with that person, just kind of putting that out there. But, my nasiha is, again, don't take your elders for granted. This is the time to really sit down with your parents and your grandparents and those aunties and uncles, that without their efforts, how would Islam in America look today? I think is very, very important, because I think we often, we put things off. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll worry about it later. We had plans actually to travel to Massachusetts with my dad, because I'm a solo parent. I was widowed some years back. So my dad has played just an amazing integral role in my children's lives that, so we were going to go to Massachusetts and COVID hit. So, my advice is don't put off until tomorrow what you can do today. That's very, very important. We just don't know how much time that Allah Ta'ala has given us. And then I think my other piece of advice in terms of, or request in terms of how we can, support, my dad, and really anybody dealing with this, is just to raise more awareness. When I was doing some research about glioblastoma, I was really surprised to learn that not not as much research, not very, we haven't, in terms of like the cancer research that's being funded, surprisingly little funds have been invested into researching brain cancer. Is really, I found that really dismaying. I'm thinking about all the money that's being poured into, say, the weapons industry, right? Just as an example, and how very little research is being done into glioblastomas. I think also talking about it, raising awareness, and figuring out how to support our loved ones who receive this diagnosis. It's startling in that in a population of 300 plus million Americans, only about 14 or 15,000 people actually receive a glioblastoma diagnosis. So it's not something you even think about. But since my dad was diagnosed with this, I've talked to folks who told me about family members who've had this condition. So I would say raising awareness, and also as Imam Khalid is saying, to please donate and to please share with your networks. We're very grateful, because there is definitely a hefty price tag on those hospital bills that are coming in. And very importantly, just to make dua, and to understand that the advances we've made as a community in this country, that those advances really go back to all the work of all these unsung heroes in our community, our elders. And I really want to emphasize that. So just please keep my dad and my entire family in your dua.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. That's very well said. You know, the the issue of recognizing those who've come before you and whose shoulders that we all are standing on. There's no generation who's not standing on the shoulders of someone else to try to help pave a way to make it easy, not easier, but just to pave a way for those who are coming behind us. And your father is one of those elders, and trusted from someone who is an elder myself. It jumps right up on you, and everyone I talk to of our generation will tell you that, it just seems like you are in you're so energetic and everything else. And then you wake up one day and it's like, wow, man, I'm the new old person around here. And so it's very important that, as you mentioned, that how your father emphasized taking action. Let's not just learn Islam. Let's do something with the knowledge that we have. And he was a very good example of that, even with his bookstores and selling books. You could always depend on your father to have a good recommendation of a few good books, not just to sell them to you, but to pass on Islamic knowledge, pass on something that could motivate you to want to do more than what we're actually doing. So he is a very well-rounded individual as it relates to Islam and the development of Islam in this country. Now, so we have a few more minutes left. Ustad Zainab, are there any other thoughts that you would like to share with this audience?
Yes, Imam Khalid, I'm so happy you mentioned the bookstore. So that was another thing too. I mean, and that's like my dad, mashallah, just had this really big vision for things at a time when people weren't really thinking about that. So he opened an Islamic bookstore. This was the first of its kind, and I want to say the early to mid 80s. Yes. In Atlanta. So if you're in Atlanta, it was right off of 14th Street, right down from Al Farouk Masjid. Mm-hmm. And I, and I have to say, given the fact that most of us probably are going online to buy our books, further enriching Jeff Bezos, for my dad to actually have, mashallah, his own kind of mom and pop, bookstore. And it was, I look back on those days because it ended up being such a powerful form of da'wah that you could walk into this bookstore and have this experience, not just of browsing these really interesting titles that he had, but also speaking to my dad, and my mom would often spend time there. And I remember they would kind of get into sometimes these debates, because you get all kinds of interesting people that kind of walk in off the street when they see it's an Islamic bookstore. And I will say this, I mean, my parents were just really ahead of their time, because you could go into this bookstore and find books on so many different aspects of religion. And, it wasn't just like one publisher or one kind of author. No, I mean, they didn't have, kind of, banned books or a list of people you shouldn't read or anything that craziness, right? It was very much about these, we're going to have this kind of wide array of offerings, something for everybody. And I really, looking back, I really appreciate that they did that. And I think at the time, I think there were folks in the community that were just kind of puzzled by that. And I don't know, Brother Mansour, he's very political. I don't know if we should go to his bookstore type of thing. SubhanAllah. And I'd like to think that we can all kind of look back at that and say, you know what, that was actually a really kind of visionary thing to do, to have this bookstore. And he, mashallah, and to this day, my dad, even though he doesn't have the bookstore to this day, he has books. He used to set up at various places with his books. That's how a lot of people actually got to know him. My seminary students benefit from the fact that he's got titles you can't find anywhere else. Mashallah, always finding something very interesting to share with them. So I do appreciate your mentioning that. In terms of, I think your question was anything else that I want our audience to know about my dad, right?
Yes.
It's I'd have to say, let me share something that's kind of on a personal note. So in my dad's 73 years, I can truly say that I've never seen my dad ever be dejected or depressed. And for me, that's really huge, coming up in a generation and also dealing with a lot of young folks where it's not uncommon that, we're dealing with issues of anxiety and depression and so on. Mental health is a big conversation in our Muslim community. And for me, it's just, it's struck me as something really amazing that, again, in the decades, right, that I've known my dad, that even when things were very difficult, even when there were challenges and struggles, that I never saw my dad lose hope in the providence and the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it was something that I really drew a lot of inspiration from when I was widowed 7 years ago. I remember my dad wrote down some advice for me because I was, it was difficult. And I held on to that. And my dad, he wasn't someone to write reams and reams about something, but he wrote very succinctly and very powerfully on this piece of paper that I should not give in to despair, that I need to focus on the future, focus on family, focus on the path ahead. And that really meant a lot to me, because my dad was telling me that even though it seemed like a very dark period in my life, my dad was telling me essentially how much he believed in me and how much he wanted me to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not every parent is able to impart that type of life lesson. So I'm so grateful to Allah ta'ala for my dad.
Alhamdulillah. And we're grateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for you and your dad and your mom and your sister as well, and the great work that you all have done. I just want to remind all of us that if we want to contribute, when you want to contribute to this Launch Good campaign, it's launchgood.com/help Brother Mansour, Mansour. And inshallah, this will be a continuing campaign. Please donate generously. As our sister Ustada has said, that we are not, anything that we give in sadaqah it's not, you're not losing anything. As a matter of fact, what you give is going to be multiplied by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is a very serious, a very demanding, financially demanding situation that our dear brother Mansour is in. So we ask throughout this ICNA network, through the ICNA CSJ, through the main ICNA, through the various departments, To anyone who's not a member or having access, if you hear about, if as you tell others about this campaign, please encourage them to help a brother who is in need of our help, as he has done so much for the Muslim community here in the United States and around the world. But right now, we're just talking about what we have talked about is what he's done here in the United States. So, Sister Osteda Zainab, I want to thank you so much for taking this time out this afternoon and explaining and telling us so many wonderful stories about your dad and about your mom, and so passionately and so succinctly describe the condition that he's being challenged with, and a method in which all of us can contribute to the finance. Finally, we want everyone, please, to make dua for our brother, dear brother Mansour. It is the most powerful weapon that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given the believer. Money is needed, but also our du'as are needed. So, yes.
أسأل الله العظيم رب العرش العظيم أن يشفيه. Please make that dua. We ask Allah, who's Alim, the Rabb, the Lord of the Magnificent Throne, to give him shifa. Amin ya Rab. Thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you so much. And on behalf of ICNA Council for Social Justice, we bid you Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairah.
Wa yakum. Alhamdulillah.